BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Hope everyone had a good weekend. Just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we truly begin. The first is that I appeared on the Citizen Detective podcast in an episode talking about the Phantom Killer, an unidentified serial killer from Texarkana in 1946, and it was a very good discussion. I had the opportunity to talk to some real true crime experts. I am the first to admit that I'm not an expert. I'm just somebody that reads books and listens to podcasts and watches YouTube videos like anybody else. And just to hear the compare and contrast with some people who are on the panel who were real true crime experts, I thought was, I thought it would made for a good episode. One more time on the Citizen Detective podcast, and some great ways that you can help out Black Box Online Radio are by hitting the like button and subscribing, and you can also go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the channel, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. Okay, and I also have a very small announcement, and that is that we should be seeing a return to the Zodiac Killer channel's Interview with the Expert series in the near future. I am also the host of that program, and we are currently arranging a new list of guests to get over there to have a new interview series for 2023. And of course, feel free to visit some of the older episodes if you have not heard them yet. And please feel free to like and subscribe at the Zodiac Killer channel. And I've had the opportunity to correspond with several different people about their Zodiac theories. I'm still talking to Sam Fisher, who has the Zodiac suspect Joseph Paul Franklin. And I've also been talking to someone who has a new Zodiac suspect whom I've never mentioned before. And I would have devoted a large portion of this episode to discussing that find, but we're still going through some of the material. But I have to confess something to you guys. This channel has a show called the Zodiac Killer News Report. That's the official name of Zodiac Monday. Most people just know it as Zodiac Monday. And today is a day that is filled with Zodiac Killer news. We have the fake news and the news that's a little bit more important. So why don't we begin with some of the fake news? Firstly, I would like to give a shout out to Barry Lauber, who sent something into the email address, blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com, and he was talking about the case breakers and a new press release and document that they have shared, talking about some of their connections to the FBI in regards to their Zodiac Killer suspect, Gary Francis Post. Now, the case breakers created a media firestorm back in 2021 when they were revealing a different press release, and they said that they had solved the Zodiac Killer mystery and that Gary Francis Post was the Zodiac Killer, as well as the murderer of Sherry Jo Bates in 1966. But they accused Gary Post of a host of other pre-Zodiac crimes, as well as the disappearance of Donna Lass from 1970. But I would also like to give credit to Batman66, who shared this info with me via the Facebook page, and he shared an article which I'll be talking about a little bit later on. But in this document, this 20-page document that the case breakers have assembled, it states a couple of different points. The first is that the FBI has highly entertained Gary Francis Post as a Zodiac Killer suspect since 2016. And Gary Post was alive, mind you, and he passed away in 2018. The second is, they were able to harvest Gary Francis' post DNA. Not only was the FBI able to do that, but Thomas Colbert, the most prominent member of the Casebreakers, was able to get Gary Post DNA as well. And I do also have to be very honest with you. I am not someone who is very good at paying attention. When I have a book, unless it's something that's about true crime, I don't read it straight through. I mean, if it's like a science book or a history book, I just start jumping around, read a little bit of chapter 2, read a little bit of chapter 7. I'm just all over the map all the time when it comes to reading. So I had this 20-page document in front of me that was created by the Casebreakers, and I'm like, okay, let's see what this is, a little bit here, a little bit there. And I saw that they had a DNA chart, which shows that they had a DNA match in regards to their Zodiac killer suspect. And I'm not a scientist. I mean, I really had to look at this thing for a while, and I was like, okay, well, I don't really understand this, but I can see that all of these different lines seem to have the same numbers. Okay, I follow that this all looks the same, and it was apparently a DNA match that was reported from someone at Towson University in Maryland. Then, again, I decided to read the press release straight through and try my best to focus. And what is their claim? What is this big news that the Casebreakers have shared? Number one, Tom Colbert claims that he has obtained Gary Francis Post's DNA from an item that was owned by Gary Francis Post. Then a CI, or confidential informant, got in touch with one of Gary Post's family members, and they provided a DNA sample, and that sample, plus the sample from Tom Colbert, were sent to Towson University. That's what the match is. That this is indeed Gary Francis Post DNA, and Tom Colbert just wants to be clear that they have Gary Post DNA. The Casebreakers, this independent organization, has their own suspect's DNA. Then they wanted to show that there are DNA samples that were taken from the 1966 murder of Sherry Jo Bates, or really I should say 4 hairs have been extracted from Sherry Jo Bates's body that they believe to be from the killer. Now, this is something that has been disputed by some people. Ken Maines of the YouTube channel Unsolved No More, as well as the history channels The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, said that there was 1 hair that was found, but the Casebreakers are saying that there were 4 hairs that were extracted from Sherry Jo Bates's body that could potentially have the Zodiac Killer's DNA, or perhaps just the murderer of Sherry Jo Bates. I personally don't believe that she was killed by the Zodiac. And were the Casebreakers able to get in touch with the authorities and get their DNA, or get the DNA of Gary Post compared to the hairs found on Sherry Jo Bates? No. But what were they able to report? The hairs were brown, and Gary Post had brown hair. Hey, he had brown hair in the past before it turned gray anyway, and that is the other big find in this document that has been shared. They have their suspect's DNA, and he had brown hair. I'm almost about to put a giant, game over stamp on this press release, but to the credit of the Casebreakers, the thing that has caught the attention of the media is, they say in the same 20-page document that an FBI whistleblower has also joined forces with them to say that there is something that is going to be in favor of Gary Post's guilt. And that is very, very briefly mentioned in there. There are only about 4 statements from the FBI whistleblower, but we don't know who that is. Not to mention that they have this other CI, or confidential informant, obtaining information. We also don't get to know who that is. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it for now. I am not impressed at all. I don't think there's any merit to this. This just sounds very sketchy and very shady, saying, well, yeah, we have our suspect's DNA. You know, that's very good for you. I mean, it's not really helpful to anyone except you that you have Gary Francis Post, a house painter's DNA, and also that he had brown hair, and I'm not even going to say anything else because there's a much bigger piece of news that needs to be addressed. And this relates to the video that came out on the Zodiac Killer official YouTube channel, which is run by Tom Foyd of ZodiacKiller.com, and it talks about a critical piece of evidence in the Zodiac mystery, and that relates to fingerprints.
because the case breakers can talk about DNA until the cows come home. I think that the overwhelming majority of people who are following the Zodiac Killer mystery believe that we do not have the Zodiac's DNA, or there is not a sample of DNA that has been extracted from any of the material, the letters or anything else, or the stamps, the envelopes, that has been definitively linked to the killer. Now, there might be something, some way, somehow that technicians will be able to extract in the future, but as of now, they don't have the Zodiac's DNA in their possession or in their knowledge pool. So what is some of the other evidence that could have been left behind? On October 11th of 1969, the Zodiac Killer committed his final crime, the murder of Paul Stine, the taxi driver, in Presidio Heights. And it's possible that a fingerprint was left behind, a fingerprint that had been imprinted in the blood of Paul Stine. Therefore, it had to have been left by someone who had touched the cab after Paul Stine was bleeding, after he had been shot. And the video that had been shared on the Zodiac Killer official channel stated that there is an admission from a Zodiac witness named Lindsay Robbins that he told to his son that he was the one who was the source of that fingerprint, that after Paul Stine had been shot, he saw the killer, and the Robbins kids are actually provided the information that was used in the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch, the very famous composite of the Zodiac that came from the Robbins kids. So then Lindsay Robbins went over to the taxicab, and he tried to lift up the body of Paul Stine, but he was unable to do so, and he got blood on his hand, and then he touched the door of the taxicab, and that bloody fingerprint that was left behind could have actually belonged to Zodiac witness Lindsay Robbins. And he said the reason why he didn't want to come forward, Lindsay's passed away now, the reason why he didn't come forward sooner is because of embarrassment. Now this is, I hope that I've understood all of these events, and I'm really trying to reinterpret some things from people whom I haven't spoken with, and I can't exactly ask Lindsay Robbins for a comment, but a lot of people are just simply shocked by this. And I would like to go to an email that was sent in to BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com by Shaper Art, a longtime follower of this program, and it says, "Hello, Ned. Upon first hearing of this, I immediately thought, I wonder what Ned will have to say about this." Talking about the new possible discovery of the fingerprints that have been left behind belonging to Lindsay Robbins and not the Zodiac Killer. Now, as I understand, this doesn't appear to be a completely certifiable fact that that was indeed Lindsay Robbins. This is only a possibility that has been put forward. My immediate response was, this was one step forward and two steps back. One step forward meaning we know a little bit more about the Zodiac Killer case, and it's not two steps back, it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 steps back, because it means that there is even less forensic material to examine, even fewer pieces of evidence that could identify the Zodiac Killer have actually been left behind. And it's saddening in some ways if this is indeed true that Lindsay Robbins left the fingerprints and not the killer. But as some people even pointed out on Tom Voigt's channel in the comment section, why would somebody want to wait so long? And people even asked me this in the comments here on Black Box Online Radio, why do you think Lindsay Robbins would wait so long to admit that he was the one who left those fingerprints? And my honest answer to you is, I don't know. But the other point is, people will often hide the truth if they have done something wrong or that they're guilty of something. I don't see how anybody could have suspected that Lindsay Robbins was the Zodiac Killer. I mean, this teenager who's watching the Zodiac after the Stine murder. I mean, how easy would it have been to come forward 6 months later, 1 year later, 15 years later and say, I do have to admit, though, it's possible that I touched the taxi cab and he could have given his fingerprints for comparison. I mean, it just doesn't seem like something that would be necessary to hide. Nobody would blame him for anything. You saw a guy who was injured and you tried to help him. Again, there is almost absolutely no wrongdoing at all on the part of Lindsay Robbins. Why would he choose to hide this? I'm not sure. But here's the other major thing. You know, what is it saying? What does Ned have to say about this? If this is true that they do not have the Zodiac Killer's fingerprints, it is going to open the floodgates for all types of people who have been pushing suspects and have been dealing with this problem of how the person has been fingerprinted, or they're a convicted killer, and their fingerprints are on file, and they have the Zodiac's fingerprints, and they should have been compared, or even somebody like the Zodiac killer suspect Gareth Penn was directly confronted about being the Zodiac killer by the Zodiac Killer Insights channel, and he said that he was a government employee and he's been fingerprinted multiple times. I mean, that's no longer going to be an acceptable response. If they don't have the Zodiac killer's fingerprints, then everybody is going to be pushing more and more suspects. And I don't mean this specific to Zodiac Killer Insights or Gareth Penn. I mean, more and more people are going to be coming up with new theories, and they're going to be pulling these bottom-of-the-barrel suspects out that have almost no real involvement in the case, and it's just going to grow and get out of control. That is my honest take on this, if these are indeed Lindsay Robbins' prints and not that of the killer. But I would like to read the entirety of the message that was written out by Shaper Art. Upon first hearing of this, I immediately thought, what will Ned have to say about this? I also put together a couple of points on this, as well as going back to some of the other thoughts on the Stein crime, which I do not claim originated with me, just that after reading and considering them, I believe that they have merit and I want to discuss them. Please see my argument against the idea that Lindsay Robbins left the prints on the cab. So the police arrive at the site of the murder and find somebody there covered in blood along with bloody fingerprints at the scene, and they do not arrest or question that individual and do not even bother to compare his prints to those on the cab because he denies touching the body or feigns ignorance. Remember, when the police arrived, they had no idea this was a Zodiac crime. It was simply a murdered cab driver. So if the cops arrive to the scene and someone is there covered in blood, you can bet that they are going to end up in the back of a squad car at a minimum and will be fingerprinted or questioned to eliminate them as a suspect in the crime. And I was reading that the first time. I was just thinking, well, I mean, would he have had time to wash his hands or change his shirt or something? But I mean, I don't even want to say anything more than that because that's just going to be me speculating in some odd direction. And if that did occur, it certainly would have been included in the police reports, which it was not, and they certainly would not have used the prints left to eliminate suspects. This reeks of BS. I wouldn't be shocked if it comes out that a prominent Zodiac killer researcher, without naming names, who has publicly championed his suspect, was informed that the prints of his suspect do not match from the cab, and decided to do a little backtracking to explain why his suspect does not match the evidence. This happens all the time with this case. Confirmation bias is a real thing, and it goes to another level when someone has their income and reputation tied to a specific suspect, and that suspect is easily excluded based on tangible evidence. And to be honest, I mean, I don't even know who he's talking about in that the researcher or the suspect, but regarding the Stein crime scene, the best theory I've read on that is that the Zodiac actually shot Paul Stein a block further up the street, Washington and Maple, which was identified as the final destination of the cab, noted in the call log. Remember, the Robbins kids did not hear a gunshot, and for whatever reason the brake was not set, or Stein simply left the cab in gear, a very common thing to do. And, okay, I do have to, throw in an interjection there. This relates to the whole point of how Paul Stein would have been driving a stick-shift cab, and, I mean, if he's just planning to let somebody out, very normally he wouldn't have to put the car into any type of other gear. I mean, he would have just left it in gear. And, I mean, he's just going to kind of wait there. He doesn't have to turn the taxi cab off. He doesn't have to do anything with the gear shift. He's just going to simply be waiting and leaving the car in gear. So, back to the email here. So after he was shot, his foot slipped off the brake and the cab started to roll down the hill. The Zodiac jumped over the seat to gain control of the cab and steered it to a stop at Washington and Cherry, instinctively taking the keys with him when he removed them from the ignition. Why did he take the keys? Simple, easier than wiping them down. This is why there was so much blood pooled on the floor near the driver's side panel, because Paul Stein's body was pressed up against the door as the Zodiac exited the cab, and the Zodiac guided the cab to a stop. Sorry, first the Zodiac guided the cab to a stop, then the Zodiac exited a cab. I read those backwards. Afterwards, the Zodiac got out the front passenger door. We know this because the door was open when the police arrived, and made his way around the cab, opened the driver's side door, leaned in to remove a portion of the shirt, glasses, and wallet. I believe, though, that the glasses were not removed, actually, and then wiped down the interior of the cab and got the hell out of there without noticing that he left the bloody prints on the outside door frame. Also, these prints were the middle portion of 3 fingers on the right hand, prints from the fingertips were not left on the scene, and those had minimal ridge detail, which is what one would expect on Zodiac's prior statements of covering his fingertips in airplane glue to disguise them. And I just also want to be very clear about one thing. I mean, the Zodiac killer said he put 2 coats of airplane cement on his fingers so he wouldn't leave fingerprints behind. And when I first read that, I wasn't too familiar with airplane cement. I thought it was for real airplanes. But I believe it was Walter in the comments section who said airplane cement that the Zodiac would have been talking about is for model airplanes. It's just airplane glue. So that also is something that is correct. But, I mean, I still get comments to this day about people saying that they think the Zodiac killer was a pilot because he talked about airplane cement on his fingertips. Additionally, the Zodiac killer stated himself, "I am the murderer of the cab driver at Washington Street and Maple Street." He identified where he committed the crime. This explains why he was wiping down the cab, why the witness did not hear a gunshot, and the blood evidence inside the cab on the floor of the driver's side panel, why the keys were taken, and how he managed to leave his prints after wiping down the cab and taking a portion of his shirt, and why he left the cab from the passenger door when Paul Stine was shot from the back seat. Still, the idea that Robbins left the prints in Stine's blood defies all logic. It is confirmed by law enforcement. Oh, sorry. If it is confirmed by law enforcement, so be it. However, I expect this is just another species claim of someone seeking their 15 minutes. Okay, now, Shaper Art, thank you so much for that email there. And I also want to be very clear about something. I will accept the result if it does indeed turn out that it was Lindsay Robbins' prints there. And as I said, that's actually a big setback for the case because it just goes to show that the Zodiac may have had some understanding of police investigations and crime scenes, or perhaps he is more what I think, that someone who was a very avid reader of true crime stories and fictionalized crime stories, and even a fool would know that there are these things called fingerprints, and maybe some way somehow just had the idea to put airplane cement over his fingertips. Or also the whole concepts of just not leaving anything behind, taking the keys with him. I mean, attempting to wipe the cab down. But the only thing that I notice in Shaper Art's email is that it doesn't provide the strongest explanation on why Paul Stine's wallet was stolen. A lot of people think that the Zodiac killer took Paul Stine's wallet because he actually wanted to make it look like a taxicab robbery, and thus turning it into a real taxicab robbery. I mean, Paul Stine was indeed robbed. But then he takes the wallet, and then the police would arrive and think, oh, well, this is just a taxicab robbery. They're not going to immediately suspect that it was the Zodiac killer. But as for Paul Stine's glasses, I believe it was Drew Gray who sent me the email about how there were some photos that were shared on Michael Butterfield's site where he showed one photo of Paul Stine after he had been shot and he was still wearing the glasses. So that is just one thing I wanted to throw in there, but that is hardly the biggest point. And, I mean, I want to know what you guys think. Do you believe that those are the Zodiac killer's fingerprints, or do you believe that they belong to Lindsay Robbins? Do you believe the story that these are Lindsay Robbins' prints? And as of now, I can comprehend how Lindsay Robbins would have left the prints on the taxicab, but I cannot comprehend why he would be so embarrassed about this, or why he would feel the need to hide this information for so long, unless there was a bigger connection to the Zodiac killer mystery, and I don't even know how to begin to examine that, what Lindsay Robbins would have to hide. Okay, I get it that you were a teenager, you made a mistake, you should have said something, and then it got too long, and so much time had gone by, it didn't feel right to say anything, but eventually he did want to clear the record, so he had to wait until a couple years after he had passed via his son. I mean, that makes a little bit of sense, but not a whole lot, because, I mean, all of these years, I just think that that's so weird and so bizarre. But what do you think? You can put your idea in the comment section down below. One more time, the challenge question is, do you believe they have the Zodiac killer's fingerprints, or do those belong to Lindsay Robbins? Now, I would like to go to your supporter shout-outs now. As previously stated, anybody who makes a donation or contribution to help Black Box Online Radio will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66, who has shared a lot of good ideas for the program, and I'll be discussing some more material from Batman66 later on in this episode. But I appreciate your support. And moving on to the next comment, it comes to us from Floyd Black 53, who said, Speaking of Zodiac, did you ever hear anything about Paul Stine having a sister? Years ago, saw a weird story about her being chased and someone trying to get her to pull over like Kathleen Johns. Zodiac lore. I can't find that story anymore. Weird. Oh yes, I definitely have heard about Paul Stine having a sister, and now this was from something that was it either on a Discord or on the Zodiac Killer official YouTube page, but it was actually Paul Stine's sister's idea to have the Zodiac Killer merchandise sold, like the Paul Stein, like the Stein that you would drink beer out of in honor of Paul Stine, that was her idea. I mean, Tom Voigt shared that somewhere once, but I have heard of that. But, I mean, Paul Stine has become discussed in this episode in a more forensic direction. But I thank everyone who has left the donations and contributions. And let's also remember, though, that the news in regards to these fingerprints does not appear to be completely solid. But I have the instinct that it's a little bit more solid than that nonsense that the case breakers were pushing at the beginning of the episode. I mean, their stuff just seems like it's made up. I mean, it's just fictionalized on their own, by their own doing, by the doing of Tom Colbert, most likely. Now, I'm getting a stronger feeling about this news in regards to the Zodiac Killer fingerprints actually coming from Lindsay Robbins, but I do indeed hope that they are from the Zodiac, so there is more info that we have about the killer and we can use to identify him.
And moving on to the next segment here on Zodiac Monday, I would like to give a shout out to the channel Tokyo Red Moon, which made about a 30-minute video on the Zodiac Killer. This came out a couple months ago, but I just happened to find it because of a recommended video from the YouTube algorithm. One more time, Tokyo Red Moon is the name of the channel, and it was hosted by a female presenter, and she might be anonymous because I didn't see any name in the credits. If you do want to watch this one, it is very much going on the basic facts of the Zodiac Killer mystery, but the stuff that I was looking for was, what exactly is this person's theory about the case? And first and foremost, there is a general overlay of the Zodiac crimes like Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, and Lake Berryessa and the Stein murder, but the presenter seemed to think very strongly that there were two unconfirmed Zodiac incidents that might have a very high chance of being Zodiac activity. In fact, I mean, she almost practically said, yes, indeed, that they should be counted as confirmed Zodiac crimes, and they are the Domingos Edwards murders in 1963 and the Sherry Jo Bates murder in 1966. The other unconfirmed crime that was discussed in the video was the disappearance of Donna Lass from 1970, and the presenter didn't seem completely certain that that was a Zodiac crime. But I'd like to begin with the Domingos Edwards murders because I have said very clearly on this channel in the past that out of all of these unconfirmed Zodiac crimes, I believe that the Domingos Edwards murders is most likely to have been committed by the Zodiac Killer, a younger, inexperienced Zodiac. On June 4th of 1963, Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards were blindsided by somebody on a beach in Southern California. The killer brought a gun, a knife, and pre-cut lengths of rope. And yes, there's a very strong case that can be made for that being the Zodiac Killer because it's so similar to the Zodiac Killer's Lake Berryessa stabbing that took place on September 27th of 1969. The killer brought a gun, a knife, pre-cut lengths of rope, instructed the female victim to tie up the male victim, and then the difference is that the Gaviota Beach shooting or the Domingos Edwards murders went absolutely wrong. And that almost everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, except for the fact that the killer was able to get control of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, or have them in his sights to the point where he was able to gun them down, and then move their bodies to a seaside shack, tried to set the shack on fire. And one of you guys in the comments section pointed out that that might not have been someone trying to burn the bodies in a malicious act. Perhaps he was trying to cover up his own failure. So then in 1969 he thought, I need to recreate my first attempt at a crime. I need to recreate my first attempt at trying to commit a murder and to get it right. And that's why he's wearing the hooded costume with the circle and the cross going through it on the chest, on the dicky flap that the Zodiac had connected to his mask. It was all about significance. It had a particular meaning to him. And as they said on the Citizen Detective podcast, it would be a blend of signature and MO for the mask. It's not purely a practical choice to wear that mask. It also has a signature. and a reason why the killer is wearing that mask. But yes, indeed, I believe that the Domingos Edwards murders is the most likely event to have been the Zodiac killer, and I give it about maybe a 7.9 or 8 out of 10 likelihood. That means about a 79% or an 80% chance that it was indeed the killer, and that's very, very high. But to those of you who follow my episodes about Jack the Ripper, which come out every Wednesday, Ripper Wednesday, you'll know that I also talk about the unconfirmed crimes in the Ripper case. Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac are very similar mysteries, but with the Ripper case, there is an unconfirmed victim named Martha Tabram who was murdered prior to the 5 women who were officially killed by Jack the Ripper. And Martha Tabram was stabbed 39 times, and she was not mutilated in the same way as the other Ripper victims, and I also give that about an 80% likelihood. But to those of you who have followed the episodes, you will know that I approach that crime with a much stronger sense of conviction or belief that there could be some type of connection, even though it's about the same in terms of the evidence. Just something about a gut feeling seems to guide me in that particular way, that she was actually murdered by the Ripper. So these percentages aren't everything. They aren't set in stone, and a lot of it relies on interpretation. And then there's some gut feeling elements that we have that you don't want to quantify, that you don't want to put into any type of analysis. When you look at the facts involving the Domingos Edwards murders and the Zodiac crimes, you have such a strong similarity between the two of them. I mean, for all the reasons that we've said, it's very similar to the Zodiac's Lake Berryessa stabbing. Now, you could make the case that, all right, the evidence is still unconfirmed for the murder of Martha Tabram in England back in 1888, but she was still murdered in the city of London, whereas the Domingos Edwards murders happened in Southern California, and the Zodiac killer was operating in Northern California. Now, some way, somehow, over these next 5 to 6 years, you'd have to expect that somebody moved locations and was regularly in Northern California. Completely possible, even plausible, but you would have to make the some type of connection. And they're in absolute different parts of the state, and I think that we can all agree upon that observation. But with the murder of Cheri Jo Bates, I've talked about her case a lot on the channel, and I thought that there was a very high chance that her crime was committed by the Zodiac. But overall, I thought there was something lacking in the presentation, talking about how the Bates Had to Die letters were more or less determined to have been a hoax. I think that the letters were a hoax written by a prankster. I do not believe that the letters that were mailed in the spring of 1967 that said Bates had to die, there will be more, signed with a Z, were indeed from the killer. But the presenter on Tokyo Red Moon talked about how there is a different letter that was mailed in the fall of 1966, November of 1966, the Riverside Confession, and it has those very odd misspellings, very similar to the Zodiac killer's misspellings, and again saying that, okay, well, this seems like a killer, this seems like the person who murdered Cheri Jo Bates, and it seemed like the Zodiac killer. I will restate an alternative that I've shared with you guys before. I do not believe that the Zodiac killer murdered Cheri Jo Bates, but I believe that he was intensely familiar with that case, maybe because of news coverage, some way, somehow, newspapers, maybe even knew people who went to Riverside, or went to the colleges at Riverside. We've got UC Riverside as well as RCC, Riverside City College, where Cheri Jo Bates was a student. Maybe he learned about these things in some way, in some manner or fashion, and was able to take an inspiration from that, because for a very long time I thought that the Zodiac killer was someone who chose the letter Z first. And this goes back to the story Sign Z by Edwin Barrett, where there's this killer who is committing murders. He's actually murdering the presidents of banks, and then he has this this greeting that he says when he calls it in. He says, "This is Z calling," and he's taunting people as he is committing these crimes. So I believed that the letter Z was chosen. That's from a story that was written by Edwin Barrett and published in Detective Story magazine all the way back in 1921, but again, very similar. And then the letter Z is chosen first, and then the Zodiac added some additional meaning to his presentation or the creation of the persona. So first, he wasn't just going to be the Z killer. He then chose the word Zodiac, and there are countless reasons why he could have done that. But we could always go back to my first instinct on how I just simply thought that the Zodiac chose that name because he thought it was a cool sounding word. He thought that it sounded rather badass, so he chose the name Zodiac. It should never be discounted that or discredited that the Zodiac may have also been taking the name from the film Charlie Chan at Treasure Island, which also has a Dr. Zodiac character who is leaving signatures and messages, and it's a murder mystery in itself, and I invite you guys to watch that film. It's available here on YouTube for free. I've also talked about it on previous Zodiac Killer news reports. So, as you see, I'm not absolutely certain about that theory that the Zodiac took the letter Z and then added on some significance, but it's just one of many possibilities. Now, the next unconfirmed crime that was discussed on Tokyo Red Moon was the disappearance of Donna Lass, and I have to take a very strong stance about this. I do not believe that Donna Lass was abducted and murdered by the Zodiac Killer. Donna Lass was working the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino in State Line, Nevada in 1970. She was abducted on September 6th of that year, and there was a card that was mailed in 1971 that appears to have taken credit for the crime, or, I'll be more precise, it alludes to some type of criminal activity that could have taken place in State Line, Nevada, or in the Sahara Tahoe area, or just near Lake Tahoe in some capacity. And it does not say anything specific about Donna Lass, and it also does not show any indication that she was even murdered. And with the Bates crime and the Donna Lass crime, and even back to the Domingos Edwards murders, I mean, if somebody actually committed those crimes, and during the height of Zodiac activity, or even the beginnings of Zodiac activity, you have someone who is writing in a letter in 1969 saying, "I am the murderer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl on the 4th of July, not taking credit for the Domingos Edwards murders, not taking credit for the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. The killer had another opportunity to do this at Lake Berryessa and did not write the dates of the Gaviota shooting on the car door, did not write the Bates murder date on the car door. It says 12/20/68, 7/4/69, September 27th, 1969. So those are all strikes against any type of involvement with the Zodiac and the pre-Zodiac crimes in the early 1960s. Of course, the disappearance of Donna Lass took place in 1970, just about 1 year after the Domingos Edwards murders. It's not a complete year like Lyndon Lafferty thought. It's actually just about 20 days shy, or 21 days shy of 1 year. So, with the disappearance of Donna Lass, we don't know what happened to her. And it's not even been confirmed that she was murdered. It's not even been confirmed where she ended up, or how anyone could be examining the crime scenes or the locations where the body was found, so to speak. All of that stuff is uncertain. Therefore, I just have to say there is insufficient evidence to say that the Zodiac Killer had anything to do with the disappearance of Donna Lass, and simply propose the alternative that she may have been murdered by somebody she knew at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino. And Mike Morford did a very good interview with Donna Lass's former roommate, Joanne Getchie, available on the channel, or the podcast Zodiac Speaking. And I heard it on just using Google Podcast and listen for free. Of course, you can listen to Zodiac Speaking for free, hosted by Mike Morford and Richard Grinnell. They do a great job over there on that channel. But then the channel Tokyo Red Moon wanted to get into the suspects. Okay, talking about the unconfirmed crimes, then the suspects. And the suspects that were discussed were Arthur Lee Allen, Richard Gaikowski, and Gary Francis Post. I began this episode by talking to you guys about how there was an enormous piece of news in the Zodiac Killer mystery, and that was that there is this discovery about the fingerprint, that the bloody fingerprint may have actually come from Lindsay Robbins and not from the Zodiac Killer. But there was another piece of news that was sent to me from Batman66, who pointed out that the case breakers, who have a suspect named Gary Francis Post, are at it again, and they are claiming that an FBI whistleblower has alerted Tom Colbert, the most prominent member of the case breakers, that there has been a DNA match in the Zodiac Killer mystery, and the DNA is
a link to the suspect, Gary Francis' post. And this is something that was shared in the news recently. It's been about 2 years. I mean, maybe roughly 17 months or something since the Casebreakers went public with their press release stating that they've identified the Zodiac killer as Gary Francis' post. But they're just saying that some FBI whistleblower has shared this with Tom Colbert, who already has terrible credibility, who practically fabricated evidence against his D.B. Cooper suspect, Richard Rackstraw. I mean, someone claims that he was told to plant evidence on Richard Rackstraw, but I mean, that is just what somebody has claimed. It's like an allegation rather than an actual conviction in a court of law. But they are accused of falsifying that narrative, and they have also put up forward a very flimsy case involving their suspect Gary Francis' post. Yet Tokyo Red Moon was not discouraged at all, and she openly said that Gary Francis' post is her #1 suspect in the Zodiac killer mystery. And more importantly than looking at some interpretations about the unconfirmed Zodiac crimes, I just have to take a strong stance and say that you have to look at where this information is coming from. And the Casebreakers have terrible credibility, and they also are not even being very direct about how they're getting their material. Some unknown whistleblower at the FBI has made this claim. Well, I mean, can I do that or something? Can I just say, oh yeah, well, yeah, and I got this BlackBoxOnlineRadio exclusive. It's not the FBI, it's the CIA, actually. Yeah, an unknown whistleblower at the CIA says that my grandfather was the Zodiac, and grandfather on the father's side, I mean, he never even went to America or anything, but, you know, I'm just gonna go with it. Yeah, CIA operative told me. He didn't tell me with words, no. I was also brainwashed by MKUltra, and I have those false memories, so I saw this in a dream that I had, and he wasn't talking to me in English, he was talking to me in a different language, which I didn't know at the time, but I made the noises for somebody loudly enough in a public place, and someone said, hey, I know what you're saying that your grandfather was the Zodiac, and a CIA operative wanted to share the message with you. Okay, where's my book deal? No, joking. I absolutely never want to put out any type of false information in a book like that, but with the Casebreakers, their story is relying a lot on just getting people to believe them, and sadly Tokyo Red Moon, so I believe, went into that particular category, that she went along with their story, even though it is heavily unsubstantiated. And it's the same thing that happened last year with the Long Island serial killer mystery. Somebody was claiming that they had this whistleblower, this secret informant, who revealed that there was going to be a DNA match and that it was going to reveal the Long Island serial killer as John Bitrolf. Well, what happened with that? It just appears that it's another unsubstantiated claim. And part of you really wants to believe that these stories are true. Part of me wants to believe that these stories are true, that there actually is an FBI whistleblower that is coming forward and sharing this stuff. And the one about the Long Island serial killer was a little bit more anonymous. However, it was also just another wild story, another unsubstantiated story. And I don't think highly of Gary Francis' post at all, and that's ultimately where I believe that. But the reason why I'm talking to you about this YouTube channel, Tokyo Red Moon, and the Zodiac Killer video that was made over there, is not to be rude or to put anybody down. It's to simply express the genuine disagreements that I have with their observations, with her observations, and that's all I intend to do. I invite you to watch her video, one more time available on the channel Tokyo Red Moon, and, you know, give your own feedback. What do you think about that? Because you're going to agree with some things, and you're going to disagree with other things. I said very clearly I thought that the Zodiac killer's crime that was most likely, the pre-Zodiac crime that was most likely committed by the Zodiac killer was the Domingos Edwards murders. We're almost in a solid agreement about that, but we just have disagreements about other things. And I would like to shift gears a little bit and give a shout-out to Wildfire99, who left a comment on the Part 2, the Friday Zodiac episode that came out, about the Starkweather Fugate murders that took place in the late 1950s, 1957 to 58. And I was talking about how lots of movies have been inspired by the killers Charlie Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate. And
Wildfire99 said that the movie Frighteners also mentioned Charles Starkweather, and yeah, thank you for that. I was only familiar with the title. When I would walk through the video store as a kid, I mean, kids these days don't even know what a video store is, sadly. But when I would walk through the video store as a kid, they had this case for Frighteners where it was almost like a 3D hologram, where if you looked at it in a certain way and you tilted the case, then it would reveal a more horrific image. It would reveal these silver people who were screaming, and it was just absolutely awesome and amazing. And I was like, wow, I can't wait until I'm old enough to watch this movie, Frighteners. But of course, I wasn't able to, like remember that one, so I've never seen the movie Frighteners, but I'm going to add that to my list. And the reason why I was talking about the Starkweather Fugate murders is because I was reading the book So I See You Don't Paint Houses by Jeremy Berthiaume, and there was another movie that was inspired by the killers Charlie Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate that I did not mention in the most recent episode, and that is Murder in the Heartland. And it's actually a mini-series. It's almost like two different movies that have been put together, one dealing with the events before their capture and one dealing with the events after their capture, particularly the capture of Charlie Starkweather. And it is available here on YouTube for free. It actually features Tim Roth playing Charlie Starkweather, and Nancy from The Craft was the girl who was playing Carol Ann Fugate, and it also features Randy Quaid and Brian Dennehy. Brian Dennehy once played John Wayne Gacy in the film To Catch a Killer, so lots of familiar faces. And overall, it was a rather entertaining and gripping presentation on the Starkweather Fugate murders. They committed a crime spree that was mostly concentrated in January of 1958, but the first crime took place in 1957. And it begins with Tim Roth talking about some reasons why people would commit homicide. Why would somebody commit murder? And very frequently on this channel, I talk to you guys about how serial killers tend to commit these types of crimes to fuel their own excitement. They do this because it's actually stimulating neurotransmitters in the brain, if I'm phrasing that all correctly. However, this film began with Tim Roth just talking to the camera almost in a Ferris Bueller style, but then you see he's actually talking into the mirror and looking at himself, and he's saying that he felt that society had mistreated him. He felt that society had been unfair to him. Therefore, he had the right to be destructive toward the members of society. And this is the character Charlie Starkweather talking. And then this just goes to show you that there is some type of mental instability going on, because countless people believe that society is unfair. Countless people believe that life is unfair. Countless people believe that they have been wronged or they don't have a fair shot at life. And they don't go on to become murderers. They don't go on to become spree killers who are just abducting their girlfriend and just are driving around the country, particularly the Midwest, and shooting people. I mean, but the reason why this comes into the Zodiac world is because Jeremy Berthiaume was talking about it in the book So I See You Don't Paint Houses, and he said that this could have been a very strong inspiration for the Zodiac Killer for all of the previously mentioned points, all of the ideas about how this was a killer who received an enormous amount of media exposure, and he was talking about being frustrated with society, about how he got cheated out of his fair shot in life. And yes, some of it was almost like small moments of personal revenge, but you can disregard all of that, because very clearly in the movie Murder in the Heartland, they showed that the first crime that was committed was an armed robbery that just got out of control. Charlie Starkweather is robbing this convenience mart, I guess, or it's a shop, let's just call it that. And the situation just boils over, and he commits a murder. So it's not even about getting cheated out of his fair shot at life. He didn't have to murder the person who was working the shop. He didn't have to murder the cashier. And it's a very extended abduction scene where Tim Roth pulls him into a car and so on, and they drive to a different location. Not giving away spoilers or anything, but I mean, this is based on a true crime story, so you can see how that unfolds. But it goes to show that there is an element of mental instability, that this person is driven to kill by a stronger factor than other people.
Okay, some people are frustrated. Some people don't like the way that their life is going, and they're teenagers, mind you. Charlie Starkweather would have been 19 years old at the time. What do? They take a can of spray paint and they do something to a mailbox or something, or maybe somebody throws a rock at a window, or maybe some people just start yelling about stuff. Maybe they punch a wall, or maybe they actually sit down and talk to somebody else about it. There are so many other alternatives that do not get to the point of not only committing murder, but also committing a series of homicides, becoming a spree killer. And I think this shows that somebody such as Charlie Starkweather would have just simply given up on any chance of returning to normalcy. And we were talking about this on the Citizen Detective podcast, the one that I appeared on as a guest, and Dr. Lee Meller even just said that that definition of spree killer would mean that someone is not returning to normalcy, or they're not experiencing any true cooling off period once they've chosen to become a killer. And of course the Zodiac did do that. The Zodiac had an enormous amount of gaps in his time frame, and we don't know what the Zodiac was doing for the winter and spring of 1969. I mean, like after the Lakerman Road murders on December 20th of 1968, and then going into the summer of 69, there are gaps in Zodiac activity that are rather small sometimes, such as the murder of Paul Stein and Lake Berryessa, like we have September 27th to October 11th, but overall the Zodiac is not committing crimes in the same way, and Jeremy Burgium didn't say that in his book, to be clear. He is simply pointing out how this famous story of two spree killers could have inspired somebody, especially somebody who may have been from the Midwest, like his suspect Richard Gaikowski was, to think about committing a series of homicides because he was frustrated with his life, or maybe it was even just a stronger inspiration in some way, and the Zodiac killer, or somebody pretending to be the Zodiac, even mailed in the Badlands card in 1974, which I talked about last time, so there is a direct connection to the Starkweather Fugate murders. But when I was watching this movie and the events of the two individuals, Charlie Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate, play out, they spent about the first half of this miniseries, which is about, maybe 1 hour and 50 minutes, purely exploring the conventional narrative that there were two participants, Charlie Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate, but Charlie Starkweather was purely responsible. He was just having complete control over his girlfriend, who would have only been 14 years old at the time, and she's doing all of this out of fear. She's just crying when he's murdering other people, and I was like, now wait a second, these are not completely established facts, because when I was watching the documentary on Our Story about the Starkweather Fugate murders, they're asking all types of challenge questions and looking at the evidence and just saying that it seems so inconceivable that Carol Ann Fugate was just this gentle, vulnerable woman who was just sitting there crying while Charlie Starkweather was committing the murders. And I tend to agree with that. I mean, I don't know 100%, but I do lean toward that particular way. And once they got about 1 hour and 50 minutes into this very extended miniseries, you could see that they're exploring the alternatives, and Charlie Starkweather would make a very strong attempt to show that he didn't commit all of the murders. He said very clearly that his partner in crime, Carol Ann Fugate, was responsible for the murder of her own sister, as well as at least one of the shootings. And if you do ever watch this film, Murder in the Heartland, they have scenes of Carol Ann Fugate holding the gun while Charlie Starkweather is using a different gun to murder someone, and she's standing like someone who's an active participant, but she's not actually shooting anyone in the conventional narrative. But then they take it a step further and say, now wait a second, could she have actually committed homicide? But no matter what, she was convicted of murder, and she spent 17 to 18 years in prison, and then she was ultimately released and relocated to Michigan. Now, in this movie, as I said, Tim Roth plays Charlie Starkweather, and he is, of course, a British actor, and when I was watching this, I was really wondering, like, how is this going to play out? But they had some scenes where he absolutely pulled it off, where he looked like just this rough and tough guy out of the Midwest, out of Nebraska, and so on. But then they had other scenes where he's wearing this white button-up shirt, and he has his glasses on, and he's smoking a cigar. And he so clearly looked like an Englishman trying to pretend to be an American, and sometimes it just happens that way. But overall, I found it to be something that was very, very easy to watch. It's very fast-moving, very intense, and Ultimately, I think the Zodiac Killer was a very big reader and follower of true crime cases. I believe that the Zodiac was reading up on all kinds of things, whether it's the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Southern California. He most likely would have had familiarity with Charlie Starkweather because of the amount of media coverage that was shared about this story, and I absolutely believe that the Zodiac Killer was inspired by Richard Speck in some way, or that he read about Richard Speck in the 1966 South Chicago Massacre, where Richard Speck murdered 8 women in one night. I mean, I, of course, don't know 100%, but I do believe that as of now. So I think that the Zodiac was somebody who read about a lot of true crime stories, about a lot of fictionalized crime stories, about even comic books that talk about true crime stories, and how about Detective Story magazine? Someone who has spent at least 2 decades living in this environment and atmosphere. And that's very important, because when we look at certain Zodiac killer suspects, they are often in the age range of maybe 20s and 30s. We do have younger suspects, such as Joseph Paul Franklin, who would have been 18 years old at the time, whom I mentioned earlier. But I mean, those suspects aren't too frequently discussed. Some other 17 or 18-year-old suspects would have been Louis Myers, who would have been 17, and George Senda as well would have been 17 years old. And ultimately, I really lean away from suspects in that exact age demographic. And when I read the contents of the Zodiac's letters, I just believe that we're dealing with someone who is a little bit older than that, and that's purely based on my own unprofessional observations about the letters and the ciphers and the esoteric language that is used. So maybe someone in the mid-20s is completely plausible, but also early 30s and early 40s, and that's where I stand now. But the points that I always have to go back to: Eddie Seda, the New York Zodiac copycat, he was in his early to mid-20s. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Shooter, he was in his mid-20s. However, when you read David Berkowitz's letters compared to that of the Zodiac, absolutely unsophisticated, or just rambling, and he actually does sound like a possible schizophrenic. The Zodiac seems very composed and collected when you're reading the contents of his letters. As I said previously, I am the killer of the teenagers at Lake Herman last Christmas and the girl on the 4th of July. To prove that I killed them, here are some facts that only I and the police know. Definitely a stronger sense of mental organization on the part of the Zodiac Killer. And make no mistake, that's not a compliment. The Zodiac was a terrible person. All of these criminals that I've been just discussing were terrible people. Charlie Starkweather, Richard Speck, they are convicted murderers, and they absolutely had the awareness of their mental faculties not to commit these particular crimes. It's just with spree killers and mass murderers like Charlie Starkweather and Richard Speck, they come across as people who have given up on life and are just choosing to be very destructive before they're captured. And maybe they want to draw it out the way Charlie Starkweather did, or like Richard Speck, murdering 8 women in one night by knife. That is something where someone wants to leave an enormous amount of destruction.
And the final thing that I would like to leave you with is, I was watching the documentary about the Starkweather Fugate murders on the channel Our Story, and it featured Dr. Michael Stone, who made a very peculiar comment about contemplating murder. Now, Dr. Michael Stone, again, is forensic psychologist. He talked about the hierarchy of evil. He created the hierarchy of evil. But what he said was that a lot of people will contemplate murder and it's totally normal. For example, if a father does not give his son the allowance and then the idea comes to mind that the son thinks about killing the father, or if somebody is mean to you and then you just visualize yourself murdering them. And he said that those types of murderous visualizations are totally normal. And the reason why people don't act on them is because they have an awareness of the situation. They can comprehend the gravity of the situation, where I should not do that for whatever reason. But there's some reason that is preventing them from committing murder. And people like Charlie Starkweather absolutely showed no regard for that, or he got past that mental barrier in his own mind and decided to become a killer. Now, the Zodiac got past that mental barrier in his own mind, and he decided to become a killer, but then he had the cooling off periods. So very similar, except one person has gone completely off
off the board and into the deep end, and another person is still kind of going back and forth between normal life and the life of a serial killer. But if you would like to give a response to that about how visualizing murder is totally normal in certain angry moments, but people have this instinct that pulls them back. I just thought that was odd. I just was surprised to hear that coming from a forensic psychologist of all people. But furthermore, I would just like to say that thank you for listening to this episode. Please weigh in on the Zodiac Killer Challenge questions. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You could also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Goodbye.